Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our virtual Dirshu Mishnah Berurah here. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Hey, and today's daf in the Dirshu Daf Yomi Bahalacha is Kuf Tes Amid Beis. However, we are holding one day behind. We're going to be doing Daf Kuf Tes Amid Aleph, and we actually begin today on Kuf Tes Amid Aleph on the top line. We're in Siman Taf Tzadik Ches. We're in the middle of Sif Tes. So just to recapture what we were speaking about here, in Sif Tes, we're discussing the din of a bechor bazman hazeh on Yom Tov. So somebody has a behemoth tahora, somebody has a kosher animal, let's say he has a sheep, a goat, or a cow, and he has a bechor, he has an animal that's a firstborn. The halacha of the bechor is, really, you have to give the bechor to the kohen. The kohen brings it as a carbon in the Beis HaMikdash, and he eats it. Unfortunately now, we're today on Rosh Chodesh Av. Unfortunately, we're commemorating the fact that we do not have the Beis HaMikdash at this time, but still the Kedushas Bechor B'Kaima Imedes, a Bechor of a Behemoth Tahira still has Kedusha, and therefore we can't do anything with it. We can't shecht it, we can't eat it unless it gets a mum. If it develops some kind of blemish which renders it no longer kosher as a Bechor, it's possible. So now we can shecht it and we can eat it. And the question was, what do you do with the bechor on Yom Tov? And in the beginning of Sif Tes, the Mechaber told us, if you have a bechor and it has a mum, the halacha is that before you could shecht it and eat it, a Talmid Chacham, a mumcha, has to paskin on the mum. He has to look at the mum and discern whether or not it's a mum that renders the bechor mutter for shechitah. Nowadays, we said we don't have a mumcha, we don't have a Talmid Chacham that's considered a mumcha for these things. So now we use a panel of three Talmid Chachamim, and a panel of three has to issue a psak. And like we explained yesterday, it's not a question of chesar and yediyah. It's not a question that we need a Talmid Chacham or a panel of three to inform us and let us know whether or not this is considered a mum. So that if I know that it's a mum, I don't have to ask. That's not the way it is. The way it is we require a psak. There has to be a psak in order to be matter the bechor for shechitah. And what the Mechaber told us in the beginning of Sif Tes is that bizman hazeh, a posek is not allowed to paskin on a bechor on Yom Tov. And the reason the Mishnah Berurah said is because it's merzik misakin. It looks like he's being misakin the animal. It's like he's fixing it, he's repairing it. Because until he issued his psak, the animal was not roy la'achila. Now when he issues his psak, the animal becomes roy la'achila. So he was, so to speak, misakin the animal. That's merzik misakin. It looks like you're being misakin something, which is an isser of tikkun mana on Yom Tov, and therefore a paisa cannot paskin on a bechor on Yom Tov. And not only that, we said even further. We said, let's say you didn't know that you're not allowed to show the bechor to the Talmid Chacham on Yom Tov. And let's say the Talmid Chacham forgot that he's not allowed to paskin. So you showed the bechor to the Talmid Chacham. The Talmid Chacham looked at it and he paskin that this mum is a bona fide mum. It's a mum kavua, and the bechor is roy lachila. Still, you're not allowed to shecht the animal. And we explained why is that. The reason is because since the bechor at Ben Hashmashis going into Yom Tov was not roy lachila, because at that point in time no psak had been issued yet on this bechor, rendering it mutter la'achila, so that at Ben Hashmashis going into Yom Tov, it wasn't roy. So at the time of Ben Hashmashis, it was muktzah. And we know that if something is muktzah at Ben Hashmashis, it remains muktzah for the rest of Shabbos or for the rest of Yom Tov. So since this bechor was muktzah at Ben Hashmashis going into Yom Tov, it remains muktzah for the entirety of Yom Tov, and therefore, even should the Talmid Chacham paskin on the bechor that it's mutter for shechitah on Yom Tov, you can't check it because it's muktzah. And that's where we pick up. We pick up now in the Mechaber on the top line, on the top of Kuf Tes Amud Aleph, with another case. Says the Mechaber, Avol im noilad b'mumay. Let's say a bechor was born on Yom Tov, and it was born with a mum. So this bechor animal was born, and immediately from birth, it has a mum. In that case, va'avar v'ra'ahu, you took the bechor and you showed it to a Talmid Chacham, which you are not supposed to do, but you goofed, you showed it to a Talmid Chacham, and the Talmid Chacham paskin, even though he wasn't supposed to paskin, he did. He paskin that this is a mum kavua, and the animal is mutter for shechitah. In that case, says the Mechaber, nishchat al piv. In that case, there is no problem of muktzah, and now you're going to be allowed to shech this bechor on Yom Tov. So again, what's the difference in this case? The difference in this case is this bechor was born on Yom Tov with its mum, and the Talmid Chacham, or the panel of three, paskined on it on Yom Tov that it's a mum kavua and it's mutter for shechitah, even though they were not supposed to. In this case, you're allowed to shech the animal on Yom Tov. And we're going to see the reason is because in this case, it's not muktzah. It wasn't muktzah at Ben Hashmoshes, and therefore it's not muktzah now. Explains the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Nun Gimel. Avalim noilad b'mumay. If the bechor is born on Yom Tov with its mum, hainu shenoilad b'Yom Tov, the animal was born on Yom Tov, umum imay, and immediately upon birth it has a mum. Leka kan mishum muktzah. Over here, there is no problem of muktzah. Why not? Shaharei ben hashmashas hayaroi avlad le'achil. Because at ben hashmashas time, going into Yom Tov, guess what? This animal, this bechor, was roi lachila. Why was it roi lachila? Agav imai. Because of its mother, im haya shechitah. Where was this bechor ben hashmashas? It was in its mother's womb. Well, the halacha is, if you take the mother animal and you shecht the mother animal, then the baby, the unborn Vlad, becomes mutter because of the mother's shechitah. If you shecht the mother animal and it has an unborn fetus in its womb, that unborn fetus does not require shechitah. The shechitah on the mother is efficacious to render the unborn fetus also mutter. So at Ben Hashmashos, when this unborn bechor was still part of its mother, it was roi lachila. So it wasn't muktzah Ben Hashmashos. Ulahachi, and therefore, av shekish noilad idchei, even though upon the birth of the bechor on Yom Tov, it is now nidche, it's pushed off, it now is no longer mutter, right? Ben hashmashos, it was mutter, it wasn't muktzah, and it was roi lachila agavimai. But now that it's born on Yom Tov, immediately upon its birth, it's no longer roi lachila because it's a bechor. And even though it was born together with a mum, it requires a psak from a mumcha or a psak from a panel of three to render it mutter. So immediately upon its birth on Yom Tov, it's nidche. It's pushed away and it's no longer mutter. Still in all, explains the Mishnah Berurah, he says, Ulahachi, av shekishen noilad idche, even though it becomes nidche immediately upon its birth, shaharei nesar kol zman shelo yitiru chacham, because it is prohibited so long as either a chacham or a panel of three doesn't paskin on it that it's mutter. Mikamakim, nevertheless, kishen nimtze chacham v'hitiroi, when a chacham comes along and issues a psak, it is materid for shechitah, ein lesar mishum muktzah, you can no longer prohibit it because of muktzah, shaharei ben hashmashos lo haya muktzah, because at the time of ben hashmashos going into Yom Tov, it was not muktzah, because it was roi lachila agavimai. So, a very interesting case. So let's just contrast the two cases that we had here in Siftes. The first case is, we have a bechor. I don't know when it was born. It was born 3 weeks before Yom Tov. It was born 6 months before Yom Tov. We have a bechor. Nobody ever paskined on this bechor that it's mutter l'shchita. You're not allowed to show it to a chacham or to a panel of three on Yom Tov, and then not allowed to paskin on it on Yom Tov because it's mechzik and misakin. Even if they mistakenly do paskin on it, on Yom Tov, it's still Asar B'Achila. Why is it Asar B'Achila? Only because of Muktzah. Because since at the time of Ben Hashmashos, at the beginning of Yom Tov, it was Nidche, it was Asar at that point in time, because at that point in time, a Talmid Chacham had not yet paskined on it, that it was Mutter L'Shchita, so it was Muktzah at Ben Hashmashos, it remains Muktzah for the entirety of Yom Tov. So even if a Paisik paskins on it, on Yom Tov, that it's Mutter, you still can't check it, because it's Asar B'Tiltel, it's Muktzah. Now, in today's case, what happened is the animal was first born on Yom Tov. And I'm going to point out right now and emphasize that the case of the Mechaber is, and we still didn't explain why, the case of the Mechaber is that it was born on Yom Tov together with its mum. It had a mum immediately upon birth. So in this case, the animal was born first on Yom Tov. What was the status of this animal on Ben Hashmash's time at the outset of Yom Tov? It was Roi L'Achila. It wasn't muktzah. At that point in time, if you would have shechted the mother, the unborn fetus, this animal which is now a bechor, would have been mutter ba'achila, agavimai. So it was not muktzah ben hashmashis. Now on Yom Tov it was born. Okay, when it's born, it's usher because it's a bechor, and nobody paskined on it yet that it's mutter l'shchita. So when it's born, it's usher. But now a Talmid Chacham or a panel of three come and they paskin on it that it has a mum kavua. Now it's mutter b'shchita. So why are you going to answer it? You're going to answer it because of muktzah? No, it wasn't muktzah ben hashmashis. So memela, it is completely mutter. Now the catch over here is, like I said, why is the case of the mechaber that it was born together with a mum? Who cares if it was born together with a mum? Let's say it was born without a mum, and an hour after birth it got a mum. So an hour after birth it got a mum. Now you showed it to a Talmid Chacham, which you should not have done. The Talmid Chacham paskined on it that it's a mum kavua and it's mutter b'shchita, which he should not have done. He should have paskined on it on Yom Tov. But in any case, you now have a psak that this bechor has a mum kavua and it's mutter b'shchita, and it wasn't muktzah ben hashmashis because ben hashmashis it was mutter agavima, it was roy lachila. So again, the same halacha should apply. The halacha should be that it's mutter b'shchita. So what's the point of this fact that it was born together with its mum? So the Mishnah Berurah himself points this out, and the Mishnah Berurah says at the end of Ois Kat Nun Gimel, V'im Naila Tam. Let's say the animal was born without a mum. Let's say the animal was born complete. It's a tam. V'humam boy b'yoim, and it develops a mum on Yom Tov after birth. Oh, in that case, ayin bir halacha eich dinai. Then he sends us to the Bir Halacha to see what the halacha is. Now, if you take a look at the Bir Halacha, Dibur HaMaschil, Avalim Noilad B'mumai. Now, it's a long and somewhat complex Bir Halacha. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'm just going to read the point where the Chavetz Chaim says what the issue is. So in my Mishnah Berurah, if you go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down in this Bir Halacha, Dibur HaMaschil, Avalim Noilad B'mumai, you have in the middle of the line the words Umatzasi B'me'iri. The Chavetz Chaim says, I found in the Me'iri. And I this is my own, not that a Rishon, the Me'iri was a Rishon. A Rishon does not need my approbation in any way, shape, or form. However, I just want to point out, there are many people, if you don't spend your days in the Medrash learning, a lot of people aren't so familiar with the Me'iri. But the Me'iri is such a beautiful Rishon. I can tell you from my own personal experience, when I wrote for Art Scroll, the Mishnah elucidated. So we know that the Mefaresh of choice, so to speak, the Rashi of Mishnayos is the Rav, the Bartanura. Yet, when you're writing a work like the Art Scrolls Mishnah elucidated, which is an absolutely beautiful work, and it's written on a level where there is a simple pshat on everything. Sometimes the Rav doesn't give you such a simple pshat. The Me'iri is so beautiful for his clear, simple pshat. He focuses so often on just a beautiful, well-explained, very easy to understand pshat. So over here, the Chavetz Chaim says, "Umatzasi b'Me'iri." I found in the Me'iri she'amad bazeh, who it makes an issue of this. He explains what the potential issue is over here. And he says, the same question that I presented to you on the Mechaber didn't come up with this on his own when he pointed out, when he gave the case that the animal, the bechor, was born on Yom Tov together with his mum. He's coming from the Gemara. The Gemara uses that case. And the Meiri wants to know, why does the Gemara Badafka use the case where it was born together with a mum? What's the difference if it was born with the mum or it developed the mum later in the day on Yom Tov after it was born? Either way, our argument to render the bechor mutter b'shchita seems to hold fast, right? The point is that since the animal was unborn at Ben Hashmashis, it wasn't muktzah. So when it's born on Yom Tov, as long as the Talmid Chacham paskins on it that it has a mum kavua and it's mutter b'shchita, it should be mutter. There's no reason to asir it. There's no muktzah. So what's the difference if it was born with the mum or it developed the mum later? The Kosav L'Taretz, and the Meiri writes an answer to this question, and he explains the issue. And he says, the Efsher, it's possible, Kevin the Noilad Tam, If the animal was born a tam, if the animal was born complete and unblemished, then dichui gamurhu. Then the fact that it was nidche, the fact that it was no longer mutter, the fact that it became pushed away, that's what nidche means. The fact that it became pushed away from its heter when it became born is a much more severe dichui. It's a dichui gamur. It's a complete dichui. You see, when the animal is born together with the mum, so it's true. At Ben Hashmashas, the animal was mutter agavimai. When it became born, now it's nidche, now it's pushed off. Why? Because it's a bechor, and it has kedushas bechor. But wait a second, it has a mum. Yes, true, it has a mum. It was born with a mum, so it has a mum. But it's lacking a psak. It's still lacking a psak to make it mutter. But that dichui is not a complete dichui. It's true that it's usher, but it's also because of a technicality. It's usher. It's a bechor with a mum kavua. Why is it usher? It's also because of a technicality. It's also because the Talmid Chacham or the panel of three have not yet issued the psak. So it's, so to speak, a technicality or a formality, a very important one. It's not mutter without the psak, but it's only because of the psak. In reality, it's a bechor bal mum. In reality, it's an animal that should be royal shechitah. But if the animal was born a tam, then when the animal was born, it's a dichui gamur. It's completely pushed away from its status of heter. There's no way to be materit. It's a bechor that's a tam. It's a bechor without a mum. So when it becomes born, it has a dichui gamur. Therefore, explains the Chavetz Chaim in the name of the Miri here, v'sheyachzar v'yir roi hu davar shein oila ala das demulsa d'lo shchichi. Let's analyze this. In our case, in the beginning of Siftes, we said the reason the animal remains, the reason the bechor remains aser b'shchita, even if the Pesach paskind on it that it has a mum, is because at Ben Hashmashas it was muktzah. Because by Ben Hashmashas it wasn't royal shchita. It was a bechor without a mum. Then on Yom Tov, they paskind on it that it has a mum. Now they're rendering it mutter. It's still aser because it's muktzah. That was the first case of Siftes. The second case of Siftes is the animal was born on Yom Tov with a mum. In that case, we said it's mutter. Why is it mutter? Because it wasn't muktzah at Ben Hashmashas. At Ben Hashmashas, it was mutter agav imoi. True, when it's born, it becomes aser. But okay, it becomes aser when it was born. But now when the Talmid Chacham paskins on it that it's a bal mum, now it's mutter again, and there's no problem of muktzah. Now the third case is the bechor was born on Yom Tov, but it was born a tam. It wasn't born together with a mum. It was born a tam. Oh, if it was born a tam, then when it was born on Yom Tov, it had a dichui gamur. It completely became aser again, and it became aser to an extent that anybody who would look at this bechor now, they're completely mesiach das from it. It's a bechor, and it doesn't have a mum. What are the chances that it's A, going to develop a mum, B, somebody is going to paskin on it, which they're not supposed to do, so you're mesiach das from it completely. To consider that animal mutter on Yom Tov, that's much more of a stretch. And that's why the Gemara seems to indicate that the only case of heter is when it's born on Yom Tov with a mum, and that's why the Mechaber gives that case. Okay, I hope that was clear. I just think it's a beautiful little shaklavataria here. Okay. Now, just one other thing I want to point out, and that is if you take a look at the Bir Halacha Dibra Maschel Nishchat Al Piv. So, again, sorry to be repeating myself so often, but again, I always say when I'm doing this on camera and I can't see the audience, I find myself repeating myself more often because I can't look in your faces and know and register if people are following or not. So again, so in this case, the animal was born on Yom Tov together with its mum, and a Pesach paskind on it that it's a bal mum. Now you're allowed to shecht it. Now it's mutar l'shchita on Yom Tov. And like the Mechaber said, nishchat al piv. You're allowed to shecht the animal based on the psak of the Talmid Chacham. Now this is very interesting. Somebody should be yelling right now because the halacha that we're saying now is we have a baby animal that's born on Yom Tov, And because the Talmid Chacham paskin that it's a bechor ba'mum, we're allowed to shecht it on Yom Tov. Wait a second. We had a halacha earlier. We said earlier that when an animal is born on Yom Tov, we can't shecht it right away. Why? Because we have to be concerned maybe this animal is not a full-term baby animal. Maybe it's a nafil. Maybe it really has a din of a treifa. Maybe it wasn't held to full term, and maybe it's going to die. So we said that normally we have to wait several days before we're allowed to shecht it. And that's why the Bir Halacha, Dibra Maschel, Nishchat Al Piv says, since we paskin that we are unable to determine by looking at a newborn animal to determine if it's a full-term baby animal or not, and therefore we have to be concerned maybe it's a treifa, then this halacha is not germane to us because we can't check a newborn animal on Yom Tov because we don't know if it was kalul chadashav. Okay. Now we go back up to the Shulchan Aruch, Kuf Tes Amud Aleph on the second line. V'imra hamum me'erev Yom Tov. Let's say we have a bechor. We're going back to the normal case now of a bechor. We have a bechor of a behemoth tahira. Maybe the bechor is 6 months old. And we said you're not allowed to show it to a Talmid Chacham or to a panel of judges on Yom Tov. And they're not allowed to paskin on it. Now, how about if the Paisik looked at the animal already on Erev Yom Tov? V'imra hamum me'erev Yom Tov. Let's say the Paisik looked at the animal already on Erev Yom Tov. V'ra shehu mum sheroy li shechitah. He looked at the animal, he saw the mum, and he already decided that this is a mum that renders the bechor royal l'shchita. It's a mum kavua, it's a permanent mum, and this animal is royal l'shchita based on this mum. But the psak is not ready yet to be issued. Why? Because there's another issue. One, it's true that the animal has a mum, but we also have to know how the animal got the mum. Did the mum happen by itself? Did the mum happen inadvertently? The animal was running around, he ran into a wall and he broke something. He got poked in the eye with something, so he has a mum kavua. In that case, the animal is royal l'shchita. But how about if the owner went ahead and made the mum intentionally to be materit for shchita? Then the animal is not mutter l'shchita. So not only does the paisik have to know if the mum is a mum kavua that renders the bechor mutter, he also has to make a drisha v'chakira. He has to make an investigation, and he has to find out how the mum occurred. And maybe he didn't do that before Yom Tov. Is that a problem? Says the Mechaber. V'imra mum me'erev Yom Tov. If the paisik or the panel saw the mum already before Yom Tov, v'ra shehu mum sheroy li shechitah. And they already saw and they already know that this is a mum that renders the bechor royal l'shchita. Yachal lachkar alav b'yom tov im nafal bay hamum me'elav. They're allowed to make their investigation on Yom Tov to find out whether this mum occurred by itself, umatirai, and based on the results of their investigation, if they find out that it was me'elav, they could be mater the animal for shchita. That psak, that amount of investigation they're allowed to do on Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut nundal. V'imra hamum ritzayna loymar. What the Mechaber wants to say over here is, if the essential part of looking at the animal, seeing the mum, and assessing the mum, if that was done before Yom Tov, tahainu she'ien bedinai imhu mum kavua. They looked at the animal and then they were ma'ayin. They researched the halacha to find out, is this considered a mum kavua or not? And they decided very clearly that this is considered a mum gomer and therefore it's mutter. The only thing is they did not yet make a thorough investigation to find out how the mum occurred. Did the mum happen by itself? Or was the owner, pesheya, was he neglectful in watching the animal because he wanted a mum to happen and he caused the mum so that the animal should become mutter in shchita? As the Chavetz Chaim explains in the brackets, shekol mum shalei nafal b'atzmai, because any time a mum didn't occur on its own, el acherim garmaloi b'kavana, rather others caused the mum to happen to the animal with intent to render the bechor mutter ba'achila, Ein a chashav mum l'shachit al piv. That's not considered a mum that renders the animal mutter b'shchita. This investigation you're allowed to do on Yom Tov. And that is not considered part of the Isser to go ahead and look at a mum of a bechor on Yom Tov and render a psak on Yom Tov. That's not considered part of it because the essential part was already done before Yom Tov. Okay, let's do the words of the Ramah here and finish Siftes. Haggah, says the Ramah, V'im nafal bechor lebar. Let's say a bechor animal falls into a bar on Yom Tov. You don't want to leave the animal in the bar. You want to get it out of the bar. Says the Ramah, Asar laha loisai. You're not allowed to bring the bechor out of the bar. Taha ain't a royal shechitah because it's muktzah. It's not royal shechitah. A bechor on Yom Tov, we just finished saying, the Talmidei Chachamim, the Paiskim, are not allowed to paskin if it has a mum, if it's royal shechitah. So you have a bechor with no psak of heter. So this bechor is not royal shechitah on Yom Tov. So it's muktzah. So how could you be metaltal it? You can't pull it up out of the bar. So what do? You're going to have to bring food to the animal inside the bar. Certainly, you're not going to allow the animal to just sit in the bar and starve to death. So you're going to have to bring food and water to the bechor inside the bar, but you cannot bring it up out of the bar. I made a bracha on my coffee before I started this year. Excuse me, I just have to keep my throat lubricated. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting and hay. You're not allowed to lift the bechor out of the bar. Even if it fell into the bar and it developed a mum, you're still not allowed to bring it up. Like the Ramah says, the reason you're not allowed to bring it up is because it's not royal shechitah. Even if it got a mum when it fell in the bar, it's still not royal shechitah because nobody paskined on it that it's a mum kavua, and they're not allowed to paskin on Yom Tov. And to be metaltal the animal, to handle the animal if it's not l'tzar shechitah, that's also on Yom Tov. Rather, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to feed the animal in its place. Again, how come nobody was jumping out of their chairs? How are you allowed to feed the animal? We discussed earlier in Siman Tov Tzadik Zayin that any animal that's muktzah, you're not allowed to feed. We spoke about, let's say, fowl, chickens or geese that are mechusar tzeda, or wild birds that are mechusar tzeda. So you're not allowed to eat them on Yom Tov because you're not allowed to trap them on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to give them food and water on Yom Tov because of Gzera, that if you give them food and food and water on Yom Tov, we're afraid you might take them to eat them and you might be metaltal them, and you're not allowed to. They're muktzah. So how are you allowed to feed this bechor that's in the bar? It's muktzah. How come you're allowed to feed it? Over here, they will matter you to bring food and water to the animal in the bar so that it shouldn't die and you shouldn't experience a significant financial loss. Now, the Mefarshim point out over here that really there's another thing you could do. We said earlier in Siman Tov Tzadik Zayin, even though you're not allowed to feed the animal, give the animal water on Yom Tov if it's muktzah, what you are allowed to do is, the Mishnah Berurah told us, you're allowed to put the food and the water a little bit away from the animal. So I guess if the bar is big enough that you could lower food and drink down, let's say a few feet away from the animal, so that the animal has to walk over to get it, then you would be allowed to do that even without a heter of shelo yomus. You don't have to come on to the kula of hefsid meruba. That you're always allowed to do. You're always allowed to put food and drink in front of near a muktzah animal on Yom Tov, as long as you don't put it right in front of them. As long as you make a heker and you don't put it right in front of them, you put it a little far away, that you're always allowed to do. I guess the reason the Mishnah Berurah doesn't point that out here, I guess that wouldn't be the case that shchiach, the more normal case where an animal falls into a bar, I guess typically a bar is not a roomy bar. Okay. Now we go to Sif Yud. Says the Mechaber, Oisai v'es benoi. We know the Torah Kedosha gives us an iser of oisoi ve'es benoi lo yishchatu b'yom echad. You're not allowed to shecht a mother cow and a child on the same day. So you have a mother cow and you have a calf. You're not allowed to shecht them both on the same day. Oisoi ve'es benoi shenaflu labar. Now you have a mother cow and a calf and her calf that both fell into a bar together at the same time. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah and Ice Cotton and Zion and see what the issue is. Oisai ve'espinoi. The behemois ba'alma shenaflu. If we would be talking about ordinary animals that fell into a bar, so you have two cows. You have Bessie and Elsie, and they're not related, and they both fell into a bar. Okay, the vadai mutaloi lahaloisai. You're allowed to bring both of them out of the bar. Neither one of them are muktzah. They're both royal shechitah. Theoretically, you could check them both today. Let's say a lot of guests show up and you need a lot of food. You could check them both today. Even if you're not going to use them today, they're still royal shechitah. Since they're perfectly royal shechitah, and you might need them, therefore they're not muktzah. You have cows out in the pasture. You're allowed to shecht the cow for your Yom Tov Suda. If a lot of people show up, you might need two cows. So two cows fell into the bar. Neither one of them are muktzah. You could bring them both up out of the bar. Avol oisoi vespenoi. But if you're dealing with a case of oisoi vespenoi, if Elsie fell into the bar together with her calf, now you have an issue. Because one of them, you're not going to be allowed to shecht. You can't shecht both of these animals today. That would be oisoi vespenoi. So if you bring them both out of the bar, you're being metaltal one of these animals shaloi l'tzarech Yom Tov, because you're not allowed to shecht it today. And therefore, the bechor is going to tell us the only way we're going to be allowed to bring both animals out of the bar on Yom Tov is by using ha'arama, by using a halachically permissible form of trickery. What's that going to be? So let's go back to the Mechaber, Sif Yud. You have the mother and the child animals that fell together into a bar. So you pull up one with the understanding that it's royal shechitah, and I'm going to shecht it. Yeah, you know what? I see Elsie fell into the bar. Well, Elsie is a nice juicy cow. I could use a fresh prime rib today for the Suda. So I'm going to bring Elsie up out of the bar on the condition that I'm going to shecht it. And then don't shecht it. What does that mean? So it says the Mishnah Berurah nice cut nunches. Pull her up out of the bar with the understanding that you're going to shecht her for Yom Tov use, and then do not shecht her. Because you'll come up with an excuse not to shecht her. You know what? You'll bring Elsie up out of the bar based on the understanding that you're going to shecht her and have a nice prime rib. Then after you bring her up, you're going to look at her and you're going to say, you know what? From Elsie, I could get a nice prime rib. But from Elsie's calf that's in the bar still, I could get a nice breast of veal with a pocket, and I could make stuffed veal. Or my personal favorite cut, you get a rack of veal. Back in the day when I was involved in the meat business, that was my big covered Yom Tov on Pesach. Shlomo Zalman, if you're out there, I hope you're not drooling. I would prepare for myself a full rack of veal. I mean, that's a malchustic cut. You go to Glotmart and you want a whole rack of veal. You're going to pay somewhere, depending on the size, somewhere between $600 and $800 for that rack. I was in the business. I was able to get it. So Pesach, that would be my big covered Yom Tov of Pesach. It'll be the rack of veal. So you brought Elsie out of the bar and for the prime rib, but then you said, you know what? Maybe the rack of veal will be better. So now I want to bring the calf out of the bar. Maybe the other one is fattier, juicier, better. And we're matter you to make this kind of trickery. We have two reasons to be makel over here. One is tsar balachayim. We have two animals that are stuck in a bar. And the other one is Also, a hefsid moment. You don't know what's going to happen if two animals are stuck in a bar. They're going to struggle. They're going to try to get out. Who knows what's going to happen? By the end of Yom Tov, you might have one or two dead animals. So for that hefsid also, we make this kula and we allow you to be ma'arid. But now let's continue the mechaber. So I'm just going to read from the beginning of the sif. First you bring up the first one, but then and then you don't shecht it. And then the chayzer umarim umalas hasheni. And then you use this trick to allow yourself to bring up the second animal out of the bar as well. And then the mechaber says, Ratza zeh shechit, Ratza zeh shechit, which literally means now after you brought both animals up out of the bar, you brought the first animal up out of the bar with the excuse that, yeah, it's tzarech Yom Tov because I'm going to shecht it. Then you decided not to shecht it because you said maybe the other one is better. So now you're bringing the second one up with the excuse that maybe I'll shecht that one. And now, says the Shulchan Aruch, once you have both of them up out of the bar, shecht whichever one you want. So understood literally, what the Bechor seems to be telling us is, you need to shecht one, but you do not have to shecht both. You could shecht either or. Let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut nun test. Ratza zeh shechit umashma. The implication of the words of the mechaber is dal kalpanim mechuyev lishchet echad mehem. You're mechuyev to shecht at least one of them. Just you could check whichever one you want. Achein, however, harbe paiskim heviu b'shem hayushami. Many paiskim bring down from the Yerushalmi, and then the Sharatzi, and he quotes this from the Iter, the Shabbalaleket, the Meiri, the Rashba. They bring down from the Yerushalmi. If you don't want to shecht either one of them after you bring them up out of the bar, you could do that as well. You're not mechuyev to shecht any of them. If you want, you could shecht either or, but if you want, you don't have to shecht either one. The point is, we gave you a ha'arama, we gave you a halachically permissible type of trickery that allowed you to bring both animals out of the bar beheter. So that you accomplished. Once you have them out of the bar, we're not going to force you to shecht either one. When we come makom, nevertheless, the Rashba does write in his Sefer Avodas HaKodesh, it would be proper to be concerned and to rule stringently and to shecht at least one of them. Why? Because we don't want the ha'arama to be clear. If you pulled both of those animals out of the bar, and at the end of the day you didn't shecht either one, it's very clear that you are doing a ha'arama, and we don't want to make that ha'arama so obvious. Okay, now we go to Sif Yud Aleph, bottom line of the Shulchan Aruch. Behema, you have an animal, chetzia shel eina Yehudi v'chetzia shel Yisrael, that is owned half by a non-Jew and half by a Yid. Okay, so you have a shutvis. Reuven has a shutvis with Tony. Reuven owns half the cow, Tony owns half the cow. Reuven wants to shecht the cow to eat it on Yom Tov. Now, obviously, Tony gives him permission to do this. Tony is okay with the animal being slaughtered. But now, when you do the shechitah, you're not only doing a shechitah for yourself, you're also doing a shechitah over here that's also going to benefit Tony. So is that a problem? Is that problematic that you're doing the malacha to benefit the non-Jew? Says the mechaber, Yechelim l'shachitah b'Yom Tov, you're allowed to shecht this animal on Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eiskat and Samach, Yechelim l'shachitah, you're allowed to shecht it. Why are you allowed to shecht it? Why is it okay for you to do malacha for Tony? Kevan de'ef shel kazayis basar b'loy shechitah, because the fact is, you want to eat your half of the animal. There's no way for you to eat your half of the animal without doing the shechitah. So, it comes out, you're not doing malacha on behalf of Tony. All of the malacha that you're doing for yourself. The complete shechitah that I'm doing is necessary for my enjoyment of this meat on Yom Tov, and therefore it is mutter. And we're going to stop over here. Yetz Hashem, tomorrow we'll pick up on the last word of Kuf Tes Amud Aleph in the Shulchan Aruch, right by the Samach Aleph of the Mishnah Berurah. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. I'm reminding the Olam that on Wednesday nights, I also say at Tehillah Mashir, I'll send out the Zoom invite, the Zoom information on the text. It's 8 p.m. If anybody wants to join, I would love to see you. If you come on Zoom, I could actually see you. Okay, the Rebbeinu Shalom should chick Yeshuas and Refuas and Parnasa and everything that anybody needs, Shidduchim, everything wonderful. No, we're here on Rosh Chodesh Av. We're mispal to the Rebbeinu Shalom, even though we had to start Av still looking for the Beis HaMikdash. Doesn't mean that Mashiach can't come right now. It doesn't say, as far as I know, anywhere that Mashiach can't come during Av. So the Rebbeinu Shalom should send Mashiach Tzidkenu. The Rebbeinu Shalom should bring about the Bias Ga'il Tzedek. Let us have a Beis HaMikdash even before Tisha B'Av. Imagine on Tisha B'Av coming to the Beis HaMikdash, shechting the karbanos. We learned today the parsha of the Tmidim. When we learn the parsha of Rosh Chodesh, we also learn about the daily carbon tamid. Imagine coming to Tisha B'Av and bringing a carbon tamid. How beautiful would that be? Okay, be well.